one day companies will learn that working with narrative consultancy groups like Sweet Baby Inc. isn't a strategy for a big win under their belt. What they need to do is write really good stories, create compelling characters, and come up with some awesome gameplay. But it looks like Life is Strange is really struggling because one of the latest Sweet Baby Inc. titles, Double Exposure sales, were a large loss for Square Enix. I have a few different things to show off, but before I get into the topic, if you enjoy the content I create, check out the links in the description, join the community in my live streams, and consider supporting through Patreon or YouTube memberships. Now, just because a group like Sweet Baby Inc. is a part of something doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a big failure and it's going to upset fans of a franchise, but I don't think that we have seen one major success under Sweet Baby Inc.'s belt because either games do not sell well or they face major controversy. Even look at something like God of War Ragnarok, that faced a lot of criticism when it came out. I personally didn't like it as much as the 2017 God of War, but regardless, I know a lot of people did like it, which is cool, though it still faced controversy over changes like race swaps and like the more emotional route that they went instead of just being straight up chads with like a little bit of emotional development. But Life is Strange is definitely on the opposite side of the spectrum because this is a game that, yes, has always had very, we'll just call them modern themes, right? It's focused a lot on like sexuality and character development and making a modern message very prominent to the player, which is fine. It's some people's cup of tea. It's like I always say, just because I don't like a game doesn't mean you shouldn't like a game, and you might love a game that I personally might dislike. But I think that we can all come to the agreement that Life is Strange Double Exposure was another massive flop because now we're finding out that the sales were a large loss for Square Enix. I could not imagine this happening, guys. Releasing a game when you're working with a company that is the most controversial within the industry. Gee whiz, guys, I could have never seen this happening. It says Square Enix's latest financial report has revealed that Life is Strange Double Exposure was a large loss for the company, making a sequel look unlikely. I really did not see a lot of hype surrounding this game when it finally had released. Leading up to launch, there was a lot of like criticism being levied towards it. A lot of people saying, like, did we really need this? But then it came out and basically nobody was talking about it. I mean, we could tell that it wasn't doing all that good just judging by the Steam numbers alone. And sure, it did release on other platforms. But as you can see, the all-time peak 5 months ago was 8,524, which is really nothing in the grand scheme of AAA video games. Now, obviously, the way that Life is Strange has been released on Steam makes it kind of hard to judge the player counts because you have the different episodes coming out and then you have all of these different editions. But if we just take a look at Life is Strange 2, as you can see, 4.5 years ago when it released, it had 468,000 players for its all-time concurrent peak, which is insane to think about. So the fact that the newest Life is Strange Double Exposure really can't even, again, like top 10,000 people, I mean 8,500, is pretty pathetic for them. It says, though, when Life is Strange Double Exposure was first revealed, as long as the long-awaited return of Max Caulfield, it seemed that it'd be a slam dunk for fans of the series. Sure, there were questions about how it would handle the first game's big choice, but bring back the heroine that started Life is Strange in the first place seems like a surefire bet. That wasn't exactly the case at launch. Double Exposure was met with mixed reviews from critics and faced even harsher criticism from fans of the series who really hated how the game handheld Max and Chloe's relationship and the series' overall tone and canon. It seems those marks against it have made a heavy impact on sales, and this certainly is the case when you have established characters and an established formula to a series and you start switching that up and you start holding people's hands and you're not giving them that many choices and you kind of stray away from that like original overall tone and established canon you had, that is going to infuriate people. But what they do not mention here is the Sweet Baby Inc. boycott. Now, I do not think that the Sweet Baby Inc. boycott is the only reason why this failed. I do not think that, there were 300,000 people who decided to boycott this game that did play the ones before just because of Sweet Baby Inc. But I do think that that did not help with the overall marketing and tone surrounding this game. If you did not know, yes, this was a controversial game leading up to release because Deck 9 had a writer who also worked at Sweet Baby Inc. At the same time. It says James W., game narrative writer, staff writer, and a narrative designer at Deck 9. They helped work on plot and character development, scenario and dialogue writing, puzzles and branching path design, conceiving and managing peripheral assets, but at the same time, they were also working at Sweet Baby Inc. They did South of Midnight, Real Steel, they've worked on character development, narrative plotting, dialogue, and scenario writing, and while there is no, direct correlation between these, we do not know if this specific individual had ultimately worked at Sweet Baby and then was hired at Deck 9 and they were hired specifically for that project. We do know that he's been working at both of those companies since right around the same time. And it's also worthy to mention that Deck 9 is listed as one of the Sweet Baby Inc. clients, or they were, before, of course, Sweet Baby Inc. decided to hide all of these names from their website because they realized that people were just going to their site and boycotting any companies and titles that were listed there. And we know Kim Belair wants to have Sweet Baby Inc. kind of mingle in the shadows, exist in the shadows where people aren't paying attention to them. So that's also another reason why they've removed this very, very small level of transparency that they actually had with people. But you also had decisions like this being made for the game, these warnings everywhere. Now, I completely understand bright flashing light warnings because that has to do with somebody's health and it potentially triggering a seizure or some kind of medical episode for them, which of course, you don't want to have happening. But when it comes to the actual content warnings, I find it a bit ridiculous because all you are really doing is spoiling the experience. All you are really doing is telling somebody if you are too sensitive for this type of adult content, you should not be playing this title. There are things like transphobia warnings, enables warnings before mentions of transphobia occur. No depictions of transphobia could occur. If enabled, warnings will appear on the top right-hand side of the screen before the content appears. So it's basically if you're going to be triggered, turn the volume off or skip through this dialogue, which is absurd. It really just ruins art, in my opinion, because you are just diminishing the experience one person could have. Sometimes in storytelling, shock value is used. Sometimes you're supposed to be horrified or disgusted or surprised that something's happening, but basically you're just holding people's hands and taking that away from them. And really, it's just another feature for sensitive snowflakes. I think that that's pretty ridiculous, but we had just found out a couple of months ago that they were going through major layoffs. Today, we are sad to share the news that we must say goodbye to some of our talented team members. This was an extremely difficult decision and reflects the challenging times many companies in our industry are currently facing. And then we didn't have any specific answers as to why, but we assumed that they just did not make the money that they expected. It wasn't doing as good as they wanted it to do. And now, according to Yasuda, the financial reports do confirm that Double Exposure sales were a, quote, large loss for Square Enix, something that was only made up for by the Dragon Quest III remaster. This is why companies constantly put out remakes and remasters, because they see an easy way to make money and kind of bolster their numbers. And if they didn't have that, Square Enix would have made no money, they would have lost money, and they would have looked ridiculous. It says, though, that specific numbers were not revealed, but it is clear that it didn't sell that well, and that doesn't come as much of a surprise, considering the negative reception to the game from long-term Life is Strange fans. But there was clearly some confidence that the game would do good, but clearly that just was not the case. That was not the situation that they found themselves in. And again, I don't necessarily think that it's just Sweet Baby that made this game fail, but I do think that the recent boycott did not help it at all whatsoever. Leading up to release, gamers were kind of pointing and laughing, saying that they were going to boycott this experience. And overall, it's just a very bad situation for Deck 9 Games and the Life is Strange team, and also Square Enix. And this is just what happens when you focus on pushing an agenda first, an initiative first, but you are also hiring activists who really are not talented writers or producers or just storytellers in general, and just people who really want to make a product that pushes a narrative first and foremost, instead of creating really wholesome, fun, exciting content. So I will be keeping my eye on this to see if any developers decide to come out and attack gamers. It wouldn't particularly shock me, but as of this point in time, we are finding out that this game was a major flop for Square Enix. But that's all that I really had to discuss in this video. Let everyone know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this, give it a like, and if you didn't, give it a dislike. I appreciate your support either way, but I'll talk to you all again in the next video really soon.